name is Josh. I'm the nephew to Rod, my Uncle Rod. That's how I know him. Just wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming out, but obviously we wouldn't want to be here under these circumstances, but there's a lot to celebrate tonight. Hello? Oh, that's okay. I'm gonna pass it off. We got several people that are gonna share, but as we get started, I just want to say I remember my Uncle Rod. I live in Connecticut right now, and as I tell people about my uncle and coming back home to celebrate his life and stuff, and people would ask me, well, were you close to him? And I could say my Uncle Rod was at every Thanksgiving that I could ever remember. He was at every Christmas that I could ever remember. And if you talk to any of my cousins, Missy, Aaron, Jeremy, all of us, we have these fond memories of Thanksgiving and Christmases together. And Uncle Rod there's a couple things you could guarantee every single holiday that Uncle Rod was doing. After we ate, he was always going to be the first guy in the kitchen doing the dishes. And he taught us young guys how to do it. I always remember, I grew up thinking, oh, after dinner you do dishes because Uncle Rod and Uncle Doug and my dad and Uncle Rick, that's just how it was. And so we just learned that. But my Uncle Rod was the most steady, just gentle man with the deepest voice. And I have nothing but super fond memories of him, and he was always so good to me. And I remember one time Uncle Doug, where's Uncle Doug? Uncle Rod, as steady as he was only around the Cardinals games. And one time we went tailgating. My dad and I went with Uncle Rod and Uncle Doug. And by the start of the game, you could tell it was going to be a good day. He was like, we're going to have fun today. Because I think we were walking in there all like, did the game happen yet? I don't know. If not, we're still having fun. But I always remember my Uncle Rod. He was a good man. He was such a good man.
So, Rod would work on Saturdays, a half day, as you all know. I came home from school one day on a Saturday, and Rod's standing at the sink. He's eating a hot dog. So I thought, well, I guess we're having hot dogs. So he'd stand there a while, and he'd disappear. I'd go ahead and eat my hot dog. He'd come back out, look at his hot dog and his water, and he'd go disappear again. This happened over and over. I didn't think much of it. The next morning, we went to the Diamondbacks game, and we always got peanuts and water before we went to the stadium. And I noticed that he wasn't eating any peanuts or drinking his water during the game. I thought that was a little weird because that's what we do. We got home, driving back to Glendale. We passed the hospital, and he says, I think I have to go to the hospital. This is a surprise to me. I go, why? He goes, I think I have a hot dog stuck in my throat. Said, okay, well, let's go. And he goes, no, we got to go home first, let the dogs out. We got to take care of the dogs before we take care of him. It's been 24 hours since he eaten or had anything to drink. So we go to the emergency room, and they said, well, we've got to scope him and see what's going on. So I leave, and they scope him. And the doctor comes and gets me, and he goes, you're not going to believe this. I said, what's wrong? He goes, hot dog that big stuck in his throat. I go, you got to be kidding. He goes, I've never seen anybody do that before. So we're leaving. We pass the nurse's station, and they're all snickering, like, hey, buddy, chew your food. Just say hi to everybody. Just say hi. 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 That's my grandbabies. I'm Brenda, Sheila's sister, Rod's sister-in-law. And I just want to follow up to Sheila's story with him choking on the hot dog that was like 4 inches long. At our next family gathering, I offered to blend his hamburger and his hot dog in a blender before he drank it, but he didn't appreciate that very much. But we did have that blender handy from every family gathering from then on.
I start crying and walking off, just so y'all know. On behalf of my mom, myself, my sister. There she goes.
Go ahead, baby.
Thank you for coming.
Go up there with her.
All week I've been trying to think of a story to tell of my dad, and I have 1,000 of them. Hello.
There you go.
So, as I was saying, thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate it. All week I've been trying to think of stories to tell that I could do, probably without crying. Probably not. A lot of them probably aren't very appropriate, so I did think of something. I found a 2. Time, my mom, my dad, and I were flying to Newcastle, Pennsylvania. And my dad and I share the love of coffee, and we would go to Texaco in the morning and get half English coffee and half black coffee because it's so good. If you try it, you'll love it. So we got this coffee before we got on the road to get to the airport. And on the way, if you've driven with my dad, you know he gawks a lot. Do you remember this, Mom? We're on the freeway. He has to slam on his brakes, turn into another lane, just so we don't get in an accident. Well, my coffee goes all over my leg. It's searing hot. It's boiling me. So I'm like, Dad! He's like, oh, sorry. And he's got this big grin on his face because he thinks it's funny. After my leg stopped burning, then it got sticky from the coffee that we had put in. Long story short, yesterday when we were coming to the airport, I was telling Mark this story. We get coffee in the airport. I'm sitting there, and my daughter knocks it over, spills all over my leg. I couldn't believe it happened. I'm like, are you serious right now? Must be an airport thing. The other story that I thought of is, as many of you guys know, my dad is very active. If he wasn't working out that day, it was a bad day. When I was a kid, we used to go mountain bike riding. And one of the times we were coming down a mountain, I hear my dad behind me screaming, Misty, are you okay? Are you okay? So I stop, I turn around, I say, what? He goes, you just ran over a rattlesnake. I said, no, I didn't. I ran over a paper towel tube. He said, no, you didn't, as it's squirming off the road. I had no idea. Those are my stories tonight. If you know my dad, it's gonna be missed.
Daddy, I want to do
I had the honor and privilege of working with Rod for probably 12 or 13 years of my sprinkler world life. And to be here tonight is almost unbelievable because I thought the guy was going to live forever the way he used to take care of himself. But back in, I'd been with Sprinkler World about 6 months. And I was working at the Phoenix store, and they says, hey, Monday you're going to Deer Valley. You're going to work with Rod Vogan and Gary Farr, and I think that was it. As soon as I walked in the door, I had known Rod just from making deliveries up there a few times. And as soon as I walked in the door, he says, how's it going, Peter? I said, pretty good. He says, you got latrine duty from now on. I said, what? He says, yeah, you got to clean the bathrooms. So I went into the bathroom and I looked in the commode. It was crust from the top. There must have been about 2 inches of crust all the way around the ring. I said, holy crap, how am I going to get this out of here? But I used to use this stuff at home, and it's called Lysol. So I went to the store, and after about a week, scrubbing and scraping and scrubbing and scraping, that toilet bowl looked like it was still on the showroom floor. Rod says, holy crap, how did you get that off? I said, I used Lysol. And from that day on, I says, I'm gonna start calling that stuff Vogan Blue after you. He said, why? Because he says, you're amazed by it. So now every time I go to the store, go down that aisle and see the Lysol, guess what? I'm thinking of Rod. And guess what? Next time you go to the store and pass by that Lysol, you're going to do the same darn thing. Rod, we miss you. We love you. Hope you're having a great time up there.
Hi. I'm Paul Semelio, from the Sprinkle Roll tribe. So for me, my first experience with Rod was in high school. So Dick used to shift me around the stores. So I got assigned, I think it was 1992, to Rod's store. And I show up, and the very first thing after having been at 2 or 3 other stores is everything's backwards. And it's because he was left-handed. And so here I am thinking I know what I'm doing a little bit, which I didn't know anything. And he was super helpful with that because he'd been our designer at one time. And so he had more knowledge than pretty much anybody else in the house. But here, everything is literally backwards. In order from what I'm used to, it's like reading backwards to us. The numbering system for pulling parts, you can do it blind unless it's backwards. So that was the biggest thing. So I always thought of Rod as kind of a combination between Clint Eastwood and Yoda. That was my combo for him. Really smart with everything that he would communicate, super helpful and whatnot. So middle of that year, I found out why I was assigned to go to that store. We had to move the store. So we were just going in the back parking lot from one end to the other end of the same commercial building complex. So Rod's plan was, all we're gonna do is take everything off the shelves and just lay it on the floor in backwards order at the other place. And that's what I did for a week. I kept moving stuff. And him and the other guy working at the store, Larry, they had a couple bicycles. And so what they did is they would take the customer's order at the old store, hop on their bicycles, ride over to the new store, pull the stuff backwards, and then come back over to the old store. And the customers had no idea. It was a couple of weeks that we did that, where I was moving all this stuff backwards to the other store. So that is my Rod Vogan story.
I'm Rod's brother-in-law. I'm going to tell a story about when we went to Yellowknife, Canada with my wife Brenda and Sheila and Rod. And we went up there. It's way up there. But we went up to see the Northern Lights. And they had an annual Snow King Festival. And it was a snow castle on a frozen lake. Everything's frozen up there. So it was on a frozen lake. And the snow castle, they had the windows made of ice. And it was a huge event for them. It was a big snow castle. A lot of kids. So you could tell the families got into it. And there's a cafe inside. Tables of ice, you could sit and talk to people. They actually had an auditorium in there where a band could set up and play, and they actually in the evenings had bands inside the snow castle. So it was really cool. So we got in there. Rod right away, he shook the hand of the Snow King. And this is a burly guy, beard way down to here. And it was just neat that he shook his hand, went in there. Brenda and Sheila were doing their own thing, going somewhere like we usually do. And Rod and I go somewhere else and do something else. So we saw an ice slide. And mostly just all kids going on this ice slide. But we looked at each other, we said, yeah, let's do it. So we go up on the ice slide on the ladder, and there's a guy up there instructing the kids how to go down there safely. And Rod was in front of me, and he gets up there at the top of the ice slide, and his legs went out from under him. He ended up on his derriere, went down the slide with his legs going like this, his head's hitting the slide, and he's going down. I'm cracking up laughing. He's laughing as he's going down there. And the instructor up there looked at the kids and said, that's not the way you do it. We had a lot of good times together. He was actually one of my best friends, not just a brother-in-law. And he said this about a year ago. He said, Doug, do you realize how many Cardinals games we've gone to? And I didn't even think about it, but it was over 100. And if you do the math, we went to like between 120 and 130 Cardinals games together. And started out Sun Devil Stadium. Those were brutal years. Always leaving the stadium with the let's go Giants, let's go Cowboys, let's go Redskins, let's go Eagles. We were in the NFC East, and it was just brutal. But Rod was loyal to his Cardinals. And over time, it paid off. We ended up having tickets at the stadium here in Glendale. That's when we did some fun tailgating. And actually, a lot of times we went to the game, and Rod was claustrophobic a lot of times. But at the end of the game, though, we got lost in the and we had our recovery drinks and our food there at the car to toast to hopefully a Cardinals win. But this last year was tough. It was COVID. Obviously, Rod retired, and I just want to share, I spent every Sunday except for one, I think I was traveling during COVID on his patio, going to sit there with him. And the bonding experience, we weren't going to bars, the stadiums didn't have people in them. And just the bonding experience. He loved his dog, Poppy, and Poppy always greeted me at the door, and he got a kick out of that smile on his face. He never greeted me at the door, but Poppy did. And the dog took me to him. He always had chips there. And we had each other own coolers, and we made the best of it. So it wasn't a lot of live games, but a lot of the games we went to, it wasn't about football. It was about Rod and I talking and getting to know each other. So I'm sure he would be really honored with everyone being here tonight. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Dick Wheelock. I own Sprinkler World. And I just want to say, Rod, when he first started with me 40 years ago, wow, I'm only 39, so I don't know how that happens. But anyway, he was he first started as a designer, became a very top-notch irrigation designer. Then we thought, well, you're so good, Rod, we're going to put you up as the manager of stores, which we did, and he did such a great job running 2 different stores. And as Paul was talking about, he kind of took my story away about being Rod's left-handed, so am I. Everything was backwards for the shelving and everything. So we would send salesmen out there just for the hell of it to say, hey, go try to find that fitting, and they can't find it. So anyway, I miss him. He's a great guy, just a great person, a great employee. And what else? I mean, he's just a lovable guy. Thank you.
So I wrote a speech, and I rewrote it like, I don't even know how many times. It's a really rough copy, so if I stumble, I'm sorry. And I just have to say, my dad saved my life 3 times. I almost drowned in the ocean when I was little. I almost rode my bike off the canal in Greenway and literally almost fell off a huge cliff. And then the day my son died, he told me to take care of my family and man up and do what I need to do. So I just want to say that. So I wrote this, and again, I've written it like 1,000 times, and I wrote a short version because I thought that there might have been way too much stuff in the first one. So I'm going to read this. And then Uncle Doug, I'm sorry, the first dream I had about my dad after he passed was you guys sitting watching a football game and my dad turning to me and telling me how much he enjoyed it. So the smile on his face sitting next to you. So just so you know that, I think that was probably like the best times in his retirement was being with you. Okay, so sorry, I have a lot of stuff that needs to get out. So I've never, this isn't a memory, this is just my speech. So I never lived more than 4 miles from my parents. They were always such comfort in knowing they were close by. They're my best friends. They have been forever. Give me a second, okay? I just gotta read a letter. My dad is the kindest and smartest and most honest person I've ever known. I don't know anybody who has the morals that he has. And I'm sorry, I really don't think anybody has the morals that he has because he is beyond anybody I've ever known. I hope someday to be just like him in my own way, and my kids too. I asked my dad a question about dying a long time ago. I wrote it down also with my mom, but his response was, I'm not afraid of dying, but I don't want to go anytime soon. I'm not afraid of leaving your mother because I know she can take care of herself. I'm not afraid of leaving my children, but I am afraid of leaving them before they get their lives squared away. I think the biggest fear of dying is leaving a life unfulfilled. As much as I wish he could have stayed here with us. I know it was time for him to reunite with his family. And I know JJ is so happy to be with his pops. I am sad that he won't be here to watch his grandchildren grow up, but I know he'll be watching from heaven, and someday we will all be together forever. I am forever grateful that he was my father, and we love you, miss you so much, Pops, and we will keep you in our hearts forever. And just so you know, my dad was like the most grounded, but yet still carefree person in the world. I can't even explain it. He could go from driving me into the mountains to be watching big air balloons being pumped up to jumping out of an airplane to being so grounded he doesn't want to spend a penny on anything that doesn't matter in life. I mean, he saved and he invested. I mean, he was just, I don't know, it could be like the best person in the world. That's it. So, good job, Aaron. Dad, we love you. Say I love you, Pop. I love you, Pop.
My name's Jerry. I'm the oldest of the Barton family. And I met Rod the night of his bachelor party. We drove up to Normal, Illinois, saw Sis, met Rod, and we took off for a little party. We all got up in the morning a little hungover and nobody knew where Rod was. We couldn't find him anywhere, so we're backtracking, trying to figure out where we left him last. But we had a good laugh about it. Rodney Alfred Vogan. Don't call him Alfred unless you duck. But boy, that guy, he's a good man. He's a good man. I loved him like a brother. In fact, in our family, there are no in-laws. We're all brothers and sisters. So, one thing Rod liked about the family unit that we had, that we were all family. Anyway, tonight I did settle the score. I met Dick, the owner of Sprinkler World. And I said, the only reason you know Rod Vogan is me. I gave him the ad in the paper for a designer. And I said, well, if you can do industrial psychology, you damn sure ought to be able to design the sprinkler system. And he said, yeah, I'm going to do it for short term. He said, I'll find my job. And 40 years later, he retired. So I love you, Rod. missed you. A great big hole has been left, has been left in my heart. Miss them. And you guys from Sprinkler World, thank you. Thank you for showing up. You were as much part of his life as we were. Thank you. Okay. Rod. My mother always used to call him Rodney Alford. That was the way she referred to him. And Rod and I go so far back. I had so many memories.
Translate because
Rod and I met in 1972 at Olivet Nazarene College. And of course, I met Sheila shortly after that. And we became friends immediately. We all hung out together and we ended up working together while we were going through college, working at a local hospital in Kankakee, all of us working on a psychiatric ward, which was quite an experience. And of course, Rod was well suited for that with his psychology background. But, you know, in 48, 49 years, there are just so many memories. I could go on forever, but I think it's probably appropriate that I just talk about the last visit that I had with Rod. Last time we were together, I talked about seeing him soon. And I thought soon would be, you know, within a few months, but that never materialized. You know how things always get in the way. But, you know, I think a year went by and we still hadn't gotten together, but I was planning on going out there and I had things coming up and it never happened. And then I got an email from Sheila saying that she didn't think Rod was doing very well and that he probably wouldn't want her to send me this email, but she did it anyway, and I'm ever so thankful that she did. Because as soon as I read that email, I knew that what was going on was serious. So I just completely rearranged everything on my calendar, and there was no way I was going to fly in COVID times, you know, because I have some pre-existing health conditions and I didn't want to take that chance. So I jumped in my truck and drove to Arizona. And I don't think Rod knew I was coming until the day before I arrived. And from the email, I was kind of expecting Rod to be really down and depressed and in really miserable shape. One of the explanations that sticks out in my memory that Sheila stated in the email was that he walked like a 90-year-old man. Well, when I first got there, I was watching him walk and I thought, well, that's not 90, maybe 80, you know? And then, you know, as I was there and time went by, he was walking better. It's one of those things where it looked like he just had to get up and get his joints oiled or lubricated, and then he could move better. But he wasn't steady on his feet at all. But his spirit, his personality was still 100% intact. He wasn't depressed. You know, he knew that he had a serious condition, but naturally he was concerned about it and nobody was able to tell him what it was. You know, with the COVID situation going as it was, he just could not get the appointments that he needed in a timely fashion. So when I arrived, I was expecting him to be in fairly decent shape, you know, except for what Sheila had said. And Rod, you know, said he thought he had this condition, and and he had mentioned it to several doctors, and they weren't really paying much attention to him. And he was convinced that he had that. I was under the impression, from the little bit that I knew, that whatever was going on was the beginning of the condition, you know, and that the doctors were going to have plenty of time to
evaluate him and come up with a diagnosis and a plan of treatment. As we all know, that didn't happen. But while I was there, Rod was laughing. He was talking. He was the old Rod. He was the Rod that I always knew. And just to make the visit appropriate, and I'm sure probably didn't agree with him 100%. He offered me a scotch and well, it wasn't scotch and water. It was bourbon. It was bourbon and Coke, I think it was. So we had one of those, and I was surprised that he was able to do that. But we both enjoyed our drink. And every night we'd watch TV, and he was talkative, always engaged, even though it was difficult for him to talk. His voice, he wasn't able to project much with his volume of his voice. Breathing was difficult for him, but he soldiered on. And what I remember last about him was when I said I had to go because I was going to Illinois to visit another college friend of ours. And Sheila and Rod both asked me if I could stay longer. And I really thought, well, I'll get back and I'll see you again soon. And I told him, no, I said, look, I'm going to be gone 3 or 4 weeks already from home, and I really need to go now. So I left. And the last thing I can remember is him looking at me as I'm heading toward the door with his big smile on his face. And I can still see that. And, he was so much a part of my life for those 48 years. He will always be in my memory, and I'm sure there will be many, many times when I see him and feel his presence. Thank you.
Well, I'm Randy. I'm Rod's brother. I really miss Rod. I wish I had something tremendous to tell everybody. I'm just thinking back about some stories I had growing up with Rod. He was always my hero. He was the one that defended me and protected me and kept me from getting beaten up by some people because he would step in the way. And I always loved Rod. When I think of him, I think of somebody who enjoyed adventures, and he didn't always want to follow the status quo. When we were little growing up, my parents planned trips, and to save money, we went by tent. And we lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we traveled to the western states by tent in one trip. And another trip, we traveled up to the northern east states and Maine. And in both these times, we had one big tent for the family, and Rod wanted his own tent, a little pup tent. And as he was getting older, it got to the point where his legs were even sticking out of the pup tent. And one time we had our cat with us, Snips, and it was Snips and Rod in the pup tent unless the weather got so bad that he'd join us in the big tent. But Rod liked to do his thing. I remember when I was living in Pittsburgh and Rod was out in Olivet. And Brian, you may have been a part of this story, but I remember it was around Thanksgiving. And Rod invited 3 of his friends from school to travel from Kankakee, Illinois to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the trouble was Rod didn't have a car, and neither did any other people have a car. So Rod and these 3 other people hitchhiked. And they broke up into groups of 2. And it's normally a 10-hour trip. And they both got from Kankakee to Pittsburgh in about 12 to 14 hours, just 2 hours apart from each other. Wow. And later I remember seeing a photo that Rod showed me where they were all smiling around a state trooper's car, and apparently the state trooper was warning them they shouldn't be hitchhiking on the interstate. But that's the Rod I knew. I knew Rod loved motorcycles, and when he was young and a teenager, he worked in a filling station, we used to call it, a full service filling station. He changed tires and did gas and change oil, and he drove a little Honda 50, in he was so big, but just a little scooter-like thing he'd travel. Later, when he got older, he got bigger motorcycles, and he loved also to get into trail bikes and things like that. And I remember when I first got my first trail bike, he got so upset at me because we collided into each other and we had a big accident. But that's the Rod I knew. You know, he didn't follow the status quo. We were raised in a very religious, conservative place. But when Rod came home from Olivet Nazarene College one summer, he had real long hair and a beard, and that was a different thing for everybody. And then later on, I remember seeing Rod sporting an afro.
Yeah.
That was the Rod I knew. I could talk for other stories too, but I always admired Rod, and I just wish I could have been with him much more. And Rod, I love you, and I hope you know that. That's really all I have to say. Thank you.